Ohio State has a new defensive coordinator, and I'm filling in for Austin Ward, I guess, on a Three Thoughts Thursday. I'm Bill Landis. That's Jeremy Birmingham. I wish I was on a roller coaster right now, like Austin was. But we'll try to power through this, Birmingham, even though this has typically been your and Austin's thing. I think we probably need to start a Three Thoughts Thursday on the podcast daily with a little more on Matt Patricia being the defensive coordinator. New defensive coordinator at Ohio State. We've talked about it quite a bit already. You and Austin did a snap judgments. I talked about it with Doug Maurice on Kings of Columbus and Kings of the North. So I don't want to rehash a lot of those thoughts per se, but do want to leave a little bit of room, I guess, for anything else that might be in your head as it pertains to this hire that maybe hasn't been said already. So what's on your mind, I guess, as you've thought about this a little more?
Well, it's funny you mentioned roller coasters, because this feels like it's been a roller coaster of emotions in the last couple of days as Matt Patricia's name has been bandied about and thrown out there as like the lead candidate to be the DC. And then there was some speculation that maybe it wasn't going to happen, and some looking into other names and other guys, and whatever the reasoning is for it. I'm not sure that that's really going to matter what we come up with. The one thing that I keep going back to in my head, Bill, is that I don't know, and if I have not watched Kings of Columbus as we record this, so I'm not sure what points you and Doug West Bubble Trousers have made, but I do wonder, is there a scenario at all where Matt Patricia comes out of this as a winner for Ohio State's perspective? Because here you go. You're replacing a national championship winning defensive coordinator. You are replacing or being brought in to coordinate the team that had the number one defense in the country this past year. You're losing 8 starters on defense. Everyone on the outside looking in, a lot of the fan base, a lot of people who are fans of other programs seem to hate you for no reason. Some people have their reasons. But it seems like it is a very difficult to win proposition for Matt Patricia in heading into this experience with Ohio State. And removing the Ryan Day part of the equation, I just wonder, like, what does success for Matt Patricia look like at Ohio State? Because it's unreasonable to assume that the Buckeyes will win a national championship again. It's unreasonable to assume they'll have the number one defense in the country. So what can possibly happen that would make people, and I'm going to give you the voice of the people here, to make people go, yes, that was the right hire? And that's where I'm like confused, concerned about how it, as I put on the Homer Berm crown, in what way, shape, and or form can this possibly be looked back at next January and have people go, yes, that decision was the right one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a simple, just like the defense being good, right? I don't know that it has to be number one, or that Ohio State necessarily has to win a national championship. I guess, like, if you were to say, like, the season's not going to end in a national championship, which is to then say on some level the season ends with Ohio State, for as lofty as a goal as it is, like, not achieving its goal because they want to try to win the national championship every year, is if you're not looking back and saying, like, well, that happened because the defense wasn't good enough. If you can avoid that, then I think you view it as a success, and I think that's possible. And like, I guess if that were to happen, then ultimately success, I would imagine, for Matt Patricia is that he's back in the NFL in a year or two. This is so, like, my main question, and I know I said I wasn't going to rehash things, but
let's rehash.
Well, I just like just to restate it, because I want to be clear, and I know some people are like upset about it, and I did text kind of hot, so like I should maybe like cool it a little bit with my tone sometimes, but I do have legitimate questions about like the success of the Patriots and how much of that should be attributed to Matt Patricia. And like, that's not really his fault that he was on Bill Belichick's staff, but it does just invite questions in my mind. And I would think that, like, of anybody who was the coordinator on the same side of the ball as a head coach who is viewed as like a guru of that side of the ball, and that's what Bill Belichick is, and that's what Matt Patricia was. And then when he left Bill Belichick, he wasn't good. Now he wouldn't be the first guy who was a better coordinator than a head coach. So this is an opportunity, I guess, for him to state that pretty emphatically. And if he does a good job coordinating Ohio State's defense, then I think he'll get what he wants out of it, which is I would presume, to get back to the NFL, to be a coordinator, if not maybe another head coach again someday. He's still relatively young by coaching standards, so it's not like he's winding down his career here. I think he's trying to like restart it and re-energize it, and he's doing it at a place that wins a lot. So it's not a bad place to try to do it. And then if he's able to do that, that means he was successful here, and thus it was a successful hire for Ryan Day. And then maybe in the course of doing that, you continue to prepare Matt Guerreri perhaps to take over as defensive coordinator a couple years or a year or so down the line with the way they've structured this defensive staff. So there are a couple of different pathways, I think, for this to be viewed as successful. But I like, and I guess I understand too that like Ohio State's coming off a national championship. Ryan Day has a lot of goodwill, I think, with much of the fan base. And if your stance is like, I trust Ryan Day to make the right hire here, like I'm not going to fight you on that. I'm not really trying to sway opinion. I'm just telling you what I think. I don't know how good of a coordinator he is because he was with Bill Belichick, and it's a little hard for me to discern. And then when he left Bill Belichick, he was bad. And there was other stuff on top of that with like the way he managed relationships. And I said this on Kings of Columbus. Like, I understand that when you're losing, everyone's pissed. And when you're winning, everyone's happy. So like maybe like polling Detroit Lions players is not the best sample size to make a full scale conclusion on how a guy runs his business. But didn't seem like it was run very well there. And maybe he's learned some lessons there. And I know he was doing the media tours, and he presented pretty well there. He's clearly a bright guy. So there are ways that this can work for sure. I'm not trying to be totally dismissive of that. And I think what that looks like is just Ohio State not taking a colossal step back defensively. I don't think they have to be the best defense in college football this year. But they can't suddenly fall back to like where they were prior to Jim Knowles, which is just like they look unorganized. They look like they can't get a stop. They look like they don't have a plan here. So those are the kind of things you look out for, I guess, when you're trying to discern whether or not this thing is working.
But from that same perspective, like, again, they are losing 8 starters on defense, and they're going to be worse on defense this year than they have been. So the idea,
no, I think personnel wise on the back end, though, they're pretty good, are they not? Like the defensive line's changing, but
it's good. It's certainly good. But as we talked about at Roosters on Tuesday, like if you're losing Lathan Ransom and Jordan Hancock in a safety driven defense, even if you retain Caleb Downs, I don't think it's possible that you're as good as you were when you lose what those two brought to the table. Now, there's certainly an opportunity for Lorenzo Styles to step up and emerge, or Jalen McClain, or Malik Hartford, or maybe you move Davison Igbinosun into the inside and let him run the Jordan Hancock role. I mean, there's ways you can fiddle things around, but I think from a just reasonable perspective, the idea of, did Ohio State not win a national championship because the defense wasn't good enough? I think that there's a case to be made that that's almost likely to be the case. Like, when you look at what we expect out of the offense coming back, and what you have with the what we think Julian Sayin can be as a provider in the offense, as a passer, like if they're not going to win a national championship, it almost certainly seems like it would be because the defense wasn't what it was this year. But my thoughts were, and I've been pretty vocal. I mean, especially on Tuesday show at Roosters, I don't think that there's a lot on the resume of Matt Patricia outside of the years with New England that are really like encouraging. But at the same time, he won 3 Super Bowls and was a defensive coordinator for the Patriots when they won 3 Super Bowls. So like, we can't just dismiss those things because Bill Belichick is so good I mean, he chose Matt Patricia and kept him there. And so like, I think that has to carry some weight, but at the same time, like, we've never dealt with him. I'm going to tell you the things that I heard from people on Wednesday as he was hired, super smart, great at using different personnel. Ohio State players like Nate Ebner and Jake Ballard, guys that played with him, loved him. Like, that's one thing I heard. Somebody from high up in the Eagles administration and the Eagles organization said that the staff loved him, so smart, super easy to work with, was in a tough spot because of our on-field product in 2023. Like, I think, and another person said that it was the most severe case of someone's reputation not matching who they are that they can remember. So like, it's weird because I think the point you brought up is a good one. Lions fans certainly think Matt Patricia stinks. And that is the reputation that he has now as a former unsuccessful head coach. I know Ohio State fans in the last like 6 months were wondering at points, hey, can Urban Meyer come back? Like, he was a terrible NFL head coach. right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, being a bad NFL head coach is not the be all end all. Now, to your point, the reputation that he takes from there is interesting because you would expect a guy who was a former 3-time Super Bowl champion winning defensive coordinator to, when he became available on the market again, to be a hot commodity. And yet he really was not. And so I do wonder what's the ceiling from here. But as you look at him as what I've seen in his media tour that he's been doing, like, he does seem like a guy that has taken the last year to get some perspective. And I think that what's interesting here is how he interacts with the rest of the staff. I asked one Ohio State defensive coach, and he said he's pumped, can't wait, loves the guy, thought he was great to get to know and to talk ball with. But I know that, once the bullets start flying and a different personalities start to emerge, how does that impact the staff? Because, and this is what Austin and I talked about on Staff Judgments, I think with the youth of the offensive staff, it seems pretty clear that Ryan Day is going to have to be more hands-on on the offense than he wanted to be and than he was in 2024. And I think knowing that is what changed the entire dynamic of this hire, because I was told very explicitly when this became a need that they were looking for an outside linebacker / edge coach to come in, and that Matt Guerrieri and Tim Walton looked to be pretty close to surefire locks to be promoted to co-DC. And I wonder if Ryan Day, knowing that he's not going to be able to be a part or around the defense as much as he was this past year, forced him to reassess and reevaluate what he was looking for in this hire, and thus finding a head coach of the defense like he did with Matt Patricia.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess either route would have come with some risk, right? Like, I think there's risk here. There's risk in promoting from within. There wasn't like necessarily 100% like foolproof pathway here. I think for Ryan, you're always assuming some risk when you're making a coaching change. I tend to agree with you that I think once Chip Kelly got his opportunity to head to the NFL, the tenor of the search changed a little bit, and the profile of what Ryan Day maybe was looking for / needed changed, because I think more inexperience at DC would have been a little more palatable if Ryan Day felt like he could lend a little more of his services there, a little more of his expertise and time to that side of the ball if needed. And I would imagine he is more of an offensive lead now with the youth of that staff, as you mentioned. So, like, he couldn't really leave that up to chance. So then you have to bring in a guy who's experienced. And Matt Patricia is definitely that. And I think too, like, I was watching a clip with him on the McAfee show, and like, I've watched the podcast that he did with Belichick, and I watched the thing that he did with Julian Edelman, and it's like, he, like I said, he presents well. I'm sure he knows what the perception of him is, and he's trying to change it. And like, human beings do that. I think we've all done that once or twice in our life. It's easier to do when like there's no pressure. I do wonder, if Texas has a nice day against Ohio State, what's the demeanor like then, right? Like, it's a pressure cooker job that probably just forces people into just be who they are, to trying to get the job done, for better or worse. And I guess I wonder what exactly or who exactly Matt Patricia is, because you do get a mixed bag. Like, like the guys from the Patriots do pretty clearly seem to like him, or at least you hear enough of it to believe it. And the guys in Detroit.
It's funny how championship rings make you like people.
Yeah, like I'm like I said, I'm not naive to that. I understand the dynamics there.
I go back to Chip Kelly. I go back to the Chip Kelly thing, because there was a lot of very similar conversation about who he was as a coach, as the way players responded to him. Mm-hmm. And when we got a chance to meet Chip Kelly starting last February, like, I think collectively the Ohio State media was like blown away by how affable he was, by how personable he was, by how willing he was to talk about anything and everything whenever we got a chance to see him. And so I'm attempting to reframe the way I'm viewing this hire through that lens and say, hey, I have no idea who Matt Patricia is as a person. Obviously, there are things in his life that people are going to have some questions about, and that's not just as a football coach, but I don't know him. And I know that Chip Kelly had a bad reputation when he got to Columbus, and he seemed pretty loved by his entire player group. So I'm interested to see how it works from here. But the one thing, and we'll move off of this in a minute, and this three thoughts Thursday is the coaching staff now complete for real, or is there?
Yeah,
because his philosophy certainly aligns more with what Ryan Day has always seemed to want, that multiple 3-4 type of look, and they're still the giant albatross of Larry Johnson and what he's doing or what he decides to do. And it's clearly the ball is in Larry's court. But if Ohio State, knowing what the roster looks like, knowing what the coaching staff looks like, knowing what Ryan Day's priorities have always been since he was taken over as the head coach at Ohio State, like, does it feel more and more like the right time for Larry to hang him up or not?
Well, yeah. I mean, that was like my kind of my second thought. So we can go. Like, I don't know. It's just interesting to me, I guess, that Ohio State has gone from one coordinator who I think clearly wants to be a little more multiple up front, and then was frustrated when he couldn't do that, to another who seems like he'd like to do the same thing. And then the constant there is a defensive line coach who has been primarily a 4-down guy. So what's going to give there? And like Matt Patricia probably said, like, I'll coach 4 down, 3 down, I don't care. But if you look at the book on him and what he wants to do, it seems rather variable.
That's the thing. He's probably more flexible from a formational standpoint than Jim Knowles would have wanted to be, because Jim Knowles had one defense that he always ran, and Matt Patricia has run multiples throughout his career.
And I think too, he's been like not dissimilar from Chip Kelly. Pretty game plan specific. Maybe that's easier to do in the NFL than in college. I'm not sure, but I don't opponent specific. It's not like, here's our defense and we'll mold it to whatever the offense does. It's like, okay, what do they do? And we'll respond in kind on defense. I think is probably more the approach that Matt Patricia would take, which is probably slightly different than Jim Knowles.
And we've talked about it before, but Knowles, I think, was somewhat handcuffed by the roster and by what was there. Like, you couldn't not play those front four because they were just too good.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that's right. But it was a point of contention either way that I think partly led to Jim Knowles' decision to leave. So I wonder about that dynamic now with Matt Patricia and what that's going to look like, and whether or not this is a tell that, like, Larry Johnson may be retiring. I'm not entirely sure. It is a little odd to me that, like, we've had all this coaching, like, quote unquote news happening, but Ohio State's actually not said anything about anybody since the end of the season. So it's a little odd to read through those tea leaves there. But I guess I was like, because we had gotten to this point, it's like, oh, Larry must be coming back because we haven't heard anything. And now this hire makes me think, like, oh, maybe there is something that's going to happen there, because it just feels like maybe there could be another clash of philosophies, perhaps, from the coordinator and the defensive line coach.
Yeah, I think a lot of, like, fan base is going to go, oh, are any players going to see this hire and decide to leave? And I think that like the spring and may actually have as much impact on Larry Johnson and what he decides to do as anyone else. So, like, I'm not going to speak. I'm not trying to speak out of turn. I don't know, but I wonder, this is a situation where everyone is now entering into a 3-month window of, well, let's see what this is like. And Matt Patricia is going to be there. So that's the case. It is.
Can I ask you a question about Patricia?
I would love for you to.
Sorry, I'm just wondering about the, like, recruiting aspect of this. Like, and not that I don't think Patricia needs to be like a pound the pavement, go out there and get us some 5 stars kind of recruiter, because Jim Knowles certainly wasn't that. And Ohio State has a pretty dynamic defensive staff, I think, to kind of do that on behalf of the coordinator. But is there any, like, recruiting impact here? Is it like, I'm going to show up to a high school with 3 Super Bowl rings and people are going to be pretty impressed by that, or does that not matter too much?
I mean, I think it would be better if he showed up with Chiefs Super Bowl rings, because for today's high school athletes, like, people care more about that than the Patriots dynasty, which seems like it was 3 lifetimes ago. I'm going to try to say this without being dismissive of Jim Knowles' contributions at Ohio State, because he was obviously excellent.
I think we know that those contributions happened in the meeting rooms and on the field, and not on the recruiting trail.
If Matt Patricia is just willing to have conversations with recruits and not be, like, entirely awkward, then it's a step up in the recruiting department. Okay. That said, he has not been a college coach since 2003. So It is a long time. You are dealing with a different era of high school athlete than ever before, but it might be a benefit because he's dealing with high school athletes and college athletes who are much more mentally aligned with the professional mindset that, now, hey, you're getting paid. It's all about money. Who's doing this? Who's doing that? I think that might actually give him a little bit of leverage, especially as college football starts to figure out some sort of guidelines and rules, which hopefully that happens. But I don't know that he will be Ohio State this past year really reset the way that I think a lot of coaching staffs are going to operate. And you're seeing less and less coordinators being out and being full-time recruiters. It's not necessary. The calendar has changed so much that like the month of December, you're not out on the road anyway. As long as the players, when they get to campus, can hang out with Matt Patricia and relate to him, and he can talk to them about his experiences with Bill Belichick, who will be recruiting against them. Like that, like that's a new piece of this as well. But I think, judging by what we've seen in those media hits and the time on McAfee show, like I think the guy's comfortable in his own skin. And again, when you have Tim Walton and Matt Guerrieri and James Laurinaitis and Larry Johnson and Ryan Day, like his job is not going to be a full-time college assistant like we've expected people to be prior to the last 5 years. Like he is going to be a game planner. He's going to be a schemer. And so that's why when you're talking about he's really good week to week, opponent-based game plans, et cetera, like I think that is exactly why he was hired. Like I can't think of any other reason why in the list of 10,000 candidates that it's the Super Bowl rings and it's his acumen as a game planner that make him the right fit. Jim Knowles was not a recruiter. Chip Kelly was not a recruiter. They won a national championship. They don't have to be. I would imagine that was a big part of the conversation. But what I was told from someone in the more of the ecosphere atmosphere of the Patriots is that he is a guy who will probably just take direction on the recruiting front. And at least if he does that and he takes the direction and then actually reaches out to players and at least introduces himself and gets them familiar and then says, hey, talk to James, talk to Tim, I'll be in touch when you're on campus, then at least that's a plus and a step in the right direction, because that was not something that Jim Knowles was eager or willing or wanting to do.
Yeah, and I think Patricia is 46. So he has probably just like a little more youthful energy to him. No offense, than Jim.
Well,
Knowles.
I didn't even recognize him in that Pat McAfee clip. I mean, he looked.
Yeah,
like
he said he was boxing.
Guy.
Yeah, he shaved his beard. He said it was boxing. He's lost some weight.
Patriot.
He does look quite different from what last time we saw him coaching for the Lions.
The Lions can ruin people. I mean,
I know. I don't want to be
you're Dan Campbell. Like, who has been to Detroit that didn't get ruined by that organization? So it is like it's hard to escape that and to ignore it, but whatever. Let me ask you this, and this will be, I think, what I'm hoping will be your third thought. Mm-hmm. Give me one defensive player in early research here. Mm-hmm. One defensive player that you think will be most positively impacted by this decision to bring in Matt Patricia.
At the risk of becoming
do it
too enamored with him yet again in an offseason, I might say somebody like CJ Hicks.
Yes, 100%.
Because like I think Patricia is more of a D-line linebacker guy. I think there is going to be more of a hybrid approach there, more than likely. And that invites the opportunity for CJ Hicks to play a little more upfront, maybe. And like they're looking for defensive end depth too. Like I think that could have been a reality, maybe no matter who the coordinator was, but maybe this particular coordinator might see somebody with CJ's particular skill set and think like, I can work with that. And do something a little different with him that could be pretty exciting.
Yeah, I was going to say CJ or Arvell Reese. Those are the two guys, because I think that there's a continuing conversation about whether Arvell maybe mixes it up and plays some end this year as well. So because as you remember, when his freshman year, that's where things started. Okay, your time, your chance to throw a thought or a question out there to wrap up this 3 Thoughts Thursday on the podcast.
Yeah, well, you wanted to get off the Patricia thing for a minute. Like, we're still a couple weeks away from spring ball, but you said there were some things you were already maybe rethinking or just kind of kicking around in your brain as it pertains to spring practice. So what would that be?
I think we spent a lot of time in was it Monday's podcast daily when we're talking about the running backs, just assuming that James Peoples is going to be the starting tailback and like giving him the job. And I think maybe we should think about what we learned about Carlos Lockwood this past year. And I maybe like we need to pump the brakes on the idea that anyone is just going to be given a starting job when they haven't earned it yet. And I think CJ Donaldson, how many yards rushing does CJ Donaldson have in his career? Like 3,000?
I guess like, no, probably more like 2,100 or something maybe.
Yeah, that's about 2,000. Yeah, so you're right on the money, Bill. You're so good at these guessing games. I know why like Doug likes doing shows with you. You're such an excellent guesser. He's 6'3" and 228 pounds, and he's rushed for 2,000 yards in college football. Maybe we shouldn't just assume that James Peoples is going to keep him off the field, or that he's just going to be like a throw-in or an extra in the Ohio State offense. I'm not even saying that it's a Peoples and Donaldson only competition, because I really do think, and I mentioned Bo Jackson's name on Monday. I think Bo Jackson I was told he's at 218 pounds right now and running like blisteringly fast. If he's healthy, like he's going to get a shot this spring. And when we don't know what spring football is going to look like, that's another thing that I think is we're not going to see. I keep going back to that spring showcase, and I'm seeing more and more people like Matt Rule in Nebraska saying that they're going to eliminate the spring game because they don't want tampering to happen. I've seen
what if it's just a talent show? Like they're just going to sing and like do skits and stuff.
I think that can tell you a lot about someone.
Yeah,
personally.
Me too.
But I do think that you will see, and I've seen, I think it was Ross Dellinger from Yahoo tweeting early on Wednesday about how a lot of schools are maybe thinking about completely reshaping the spring model and going to more OTA style stuff where it's just a couple weekends in order to avoid the tampering. And I wonder how, for a player that doesn't have substantial college reps, how that could impact development in what is a time to step up and be a leader. So if Ohio State is one of those programs that's going to restructure and reshape the way they're doing things, which it seems like they are, at least a little bit, then I wonder how much of an opportunity does James Peoples get to really hone his craft this spring versus a guy who's already rushed the ball, 400 times in college football.
That's fair. I also saw too, James Franklin said like that Penn State typically does between 8 and 10 like winter conditioning mat drill days, and are only going to have 6 this offseason. I think spring football as we've known it is dead. What it's going to look like exactly, I'm not entirely sure, but you're right to mention that as a way of, I think, getting home the point that the way that guys vie for jobs and establish themselves might look a little different now too. And perhaps, and I think probably definitely starting this offseason. So that's fair. Like, and I think CJ Donaldson's a good player.
I know you were really high on him, and who's the other running back at West Virginia prior to the season? Yeah. You like that duo.
Yeah, it's a good duo, and I think Ohio State's going to have a good duo too. But if you're saying maybe think of them more as a Judkins Henderson 1A 1B scenario than like a 1A 1C scenario or something, I don't know exactly how to put that, but that's probably right. Like I don't like CJ Donaldson didn't leave West Virginia to come to Ohio State and be a guy who's going to touch the ball 80 times, right? I think he's expecting probably an equal workload with somebody like James Peoples. I just think Peoples is ready. He's it's difficult to not be excited about him, but they'll need them both. I think everyone knows that. So well said by you to maybe not get the James Peoples hype train running so far down the tracks at the expense of realizing how good CJ Donaldson is.
We've all been conducting that James Peoples train since the start of the season in September. So I understand why, and the reports and the speculation and the conversation around him has always been so positive, but it just seems like, hey, maybe there's more to this. And I don't know that there's a lot of positions on this team, despite only returning 8 starters out of your top 22. Like, I don't think there's a lot of positions that are really wide open. And I think running back is one of them, because I think really anything can happen. And as you mentioned in that show, like, it is the easiest position to get on the field. And if Bo Jackson physically is just better than other guys, then he'll play. Wednesday, I got a little like confirmation that Sam Williams-Dixon might be leaning towards staying at Ohio State. He's still working through the process, but like he told, I've heard that like that's probably where he's leaning. So then you get a little bit more depth, and so it becomes even more difficult to view it. But I don't want it to. I think even when you're wearing the Homer Berm helm, like, I think it's important that we are objective about this stuff. And I don't think that CJ Donaldson is someone that has been talked about enough. And maybe that's the curse of these transfers that did happening in the middle of the playoff run, because until Tuesday's conversation about the tight ends, like, I don't know that we'd even mention Max Clare's name on the podcast at all, because there's just been nothing to talk about.
Right. I had that experience. Doug and I did defensive depth chart stuff on Kings of Columbus on Wednesday, and I was like, "Oh yeah, Logan George." I forgot they brought him in.
He's, I think, in a position to be the alternator with Caden Curry, pass rush and run stop, like different specialties, because George is more of a run stopper and Caden's more of the pass rusher. So there's just, we have not talked about the transfers, and I think maybe like it'd be helpful if we should really try to get them on, each of them on the show, like we did with Will and Seth and those guys last year, to get some insight into who they are. But because the way the calendar's changed, like, it's like, well, the season's ongoing, so we don't really care about these guys that can't participate. And here we are, and it's 2 weeks to spring ball, or 3 weeks to spring ball, or whatever. However, I don't math. But we're not talking about it. Donaldson is like a really good player, and
I'd love to talk to those offensive tackles. That'd be great.
Well, I mean, I did have Philip Daniels on an episode of Birmingham when that happened, but it'd be nice to get some insight into Ethan Anianwa and what prompted his decision when you see people telling him he could be a second-round pick and he's heading to Ohio State. I mean, it's just a weird thing. Like, the whole timeline is so wacky. It's like college football now is 345 days a year for these kids. Like,
that's crazy.
Well, they really have like 30 days off. It's insane. And we're still expecting them to be, in perfect working order all year long. The NFL gets 6 months off, and these dudes are like nonstop grinding. Anyway,
they are nonstop grinding. That's right. All right. That was a version of Three Thoughts, I think. What remind people what's going to be in the feed on Friday morning?
In lieu of the podcast daily, Austin and I have embarked on the first interview of what we hope to be a 10 to 12 interview series with different key components of the 2024 National Championship run. The series is going to be called 24 Ever. And Ryan Day, we sat down with him at the end of last week for an hour-long conversation about some of those stories that he has continually said now they get to be told. So we're going to try to tell those stories. Figured there was no one better to start with than Ryan Day. We did not sit down and bother him about anything else. So we didn't ask about coaching staffs and what your thoughts are for spring. But I wish we would have, because this last couple of days have certainly been a little bit chaotic when it comes to the coaching staff, which now it feels like, at least for the time being, is finalized. We'll see if Ohio State sends out like an alert and lets us talk to these guys next week.
Yeah, we'll see. There'll be time to talk with Ryan Day about that in the weeks to come. But I think it's nice to reflect too on what Ohio State just accomplished. I would hate for that to get lost in like the craziness of the college football offseason. Like, it's like, Ohio State won a freaking national championship. Let's talk about it a little
like
bit.
3 weeks ago.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to that on Friday. I hope you guys are too. But this is Thursday. This was the podcast daily for Thursday. It was a Three Thoughts Thursday without Austin. I hope I filled the shoes well. I'm Bill. That's Berm. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you later.